There is a mountain range in the middle of America that most Americans have never heard of. It sits between the Ozarks to the north and the Gulf Coast to the south, straddling the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, covering roughly 225 miles from east to west. It is the tallest mountain range between the Appalachians and the Rockies, taller than the Ozarks, and taller than the Ouachitas' more famous neighbors in every direction. It contains 1.8 million acres of national forest, some of the clearest lakes in the United States, a national park that is older than Yellowstone by 40 years, and a city that once served simultaneously as the birthplace of spring training baseball and the unofficial headquarters of American organized crime. Almost nobody lives there. The explanation for why starts not with economics or history, but with geology, because the Ouachitas were built differently from any other mountain range in the region, and that difference has shaped everything that came after. The counties inside the Ouachita Mountains are among the most sparsely populated in Arkansas and Oklahoma. The region has no large cities. Economic opportunity is limited to timber, tourism, and a handful of industries that never quite took root the way they did in regions around it. People leave. Population numbers that were modest a century ago are smaller now. The towns that exist feel like they exist in spite of the terrain rather than because of it. Understanding why requires starting not with economics, but with how the mountains were made, because the Ouachitas are fundamentally different from every other range in this part of the country, and that difference explains almost everything. Most mountain ranges in North America run north to south. The Appalachians, the Rockies, the Blue Ridge, the Ozarks, which are technically not mountains at all but an eroded plateau, spread in all directions from a central dome. The Ouachitas run east to west. That single fact, the orientation of the ridges, has shaped everything about this region, from its ecology to its history to the reason railroads found it almost impossible to cross. The east-west orientation happened because of how the mountains were built. Roughly 300 million years ago, the ancient landmass of South America collided with the southern edge of North America. The ocean floor between them buckled and folded northward like a rug shoved against a wall. The sediment that had been accumulating on the ocean floor for hundreds of millions of years, shale, sandstone, chert, limestone, was compressed, cracked, overturned, and thrust northward in long parallel ridges that all point the same direction. The Ouachitas are fold mountains built by collision in a way that the Ozarks simply are not. That same collision, geologists believe, continued pushing northward and eventually built the Appalachian Mountains further east. The Ouachitas and the Appalachians are the same mountain-building event, the same ancient continental collision expressed twice in two places, separated by hundreds of miles and by the sediment that buried the connection between them. Geologists have traced the Ouachita Belt underground through Alabama and Mississippi, where it dips beneath younger rock before re-emerging as the Appalachians further northeast. The mountains of western Arkansas and the mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina are cousins, shaped by the same force, separated by time and geology. That connection is invisible to the eye and mostly unknown to the people who live near both ranges, but it is there, running underground beneath the states between them. At their peak, the Ouachitas may have been as tall as the Rocky Mountains. 300 million years of erosion have reduced them to what they are now. Ridges that rarely exceed 2,700 feet, heavily forested and deeply weathered. But the bones of something much larger are still visible in the rock, in the way the layers tilt and fold at angles that tell the story of enormous force applied over geological time. The east-west ridges created an ecology that exists almost nowhere else in North America. Because the ridges run that direction, every ridge has a south-facing slope fully exposed to the sun and a north-facing slope permanently in shade. those two faces are ecologically almost completely different. The south slopes are dry and hot, covered in pine and scrub oak. The north slopes are cool and moist, and support diverse hardwood forests that look more like something from the eastern United States. Stand at the top of any Ouachita ridge, and you are looking at two different ecosystems running parallel to each other in long east-west bands, visible from the air as distinct stripes of color across the landscape. The rock itself is unusual. The Ouachitas contain one of the world's significant deposits of Arkansas Novaculite, a dense silica-based stone so hard and fine-grained that it has been used as a whetstone for sharpening blades since prehistoric times. Native Americans quarried it for tools tens of thousands of years before Europeans arrived. The stone is essentially prehistoric flint of exceptional quality, and trade networks carried it across the continent. European settlers exported it for sharpening knives and surgical instruments. The town of Hot Springs sits at the edge of what geologists call the Novaculite uplift. The same collision that built these mountains also produced a rock with almost no parallel in the world, and it has been drawing people to the Ouachitas for longer than any written record captures. The Ouachitas also contain some of the most significant quartz crystal deposits anywhere on Earth. Around Mount Ida in Montgomery County, a small town in the middle of the range with a population under 1,000, quartz crystals of exceptional clarity and size have been mined commercially since the early 20th century. During World War II, the federal government controlled the Mount Ida crystal mines directly because quartz was essential for radio oscillators in military equipment. Montgomery County quartz helped Allied forces communicate. The crystals formed millions of years ago when silica-rich fluids from deep in the earth seeped into fractures in the rock and slowly cooled and solidified. Today, the area around Mount Ida is still considered the quartz crystal capital of the world, and rockhounds travel from across the country to pay for the privilege of digging in the mines themselves. The mountain that produces almost nothing economically at scale produces something almost nowhere else on Earth does. This is a channel built on the places the country forgets about. Subscribe before you go further, hit the button and the bell. There is more of this coming. The water flowing from the hot springs at the center of the range is genuinely extraordinary. It fell as rain approximately 4,400 years ago. It percolated downward 6,000 to 8,000 feet into the earth, where it was superheated by surrounding rock, then rose back to the surface and emerged at 143 degrees Fahrenheit from 47 springs on the western slope of Hot Springs Mountain. The flow rate, roughly 700,000 gallons per day, does not vary with rainfall. The water that flows out of the Ouachitas today entered the ground around the time the Egyptian Middle Kingdom was building its pyramids. Congress recognized those springs as worth protecting in 1832, making Hot Springs the oldest federally protected natural site in American history. 40 years older than Yellowstone, which is usually described as the first national park. It was called the Hot Springs Reservation, later renamed Hot Springs National Park. The springs had been a neutral gathering place for multiple Native American tribes for thousands of years before any Europeans saw them, and after federal protection was established, the city that grew around the springs became one of the most unusual places in 19th and 20th century America. Hot Springs was simultaneously a health resort, a gambling hub, a baseball mecca, and a gangster hideout, all at the same time, all in the same place, all running openly for decades because the local government was thoroughly corrupt and happy to keep it that way. The claim that Hot Springs invented spring training baseball is taken seriously. In 1886, the Chicago White Stockings, forerunners of today's Cubs, brought their players to Hot Springs to use the thermal baths for conditioning before the season began. The idea spread. By the early 20th century, 5 major league teams were running spring training in Hot Springs annually. Babe Ruth trained there. So did Honus Wagner, Cy Young, and dozens of others. Ruth reportedly hit his first verified home run, exceeding 500 feet at Whittington Park in Hot Springs. The modern institution of spring training, which now involves every team in both leagues and generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually, traces its origins to a mountain town in Arkansas whose mayor was on the mob's payroll. The gambling ran openly because it was more profitable than stopping it. By the 1920s and the 1930s, Hot Springs had become one of the primary retreats of American organized crime, a place where mobsters from competing factions could operate without interference. Al Capone kept Suite 443 at the Arlington Hotel as a part-time residence. Lucky Luciano was eventually arrested not in Chicago or New York, but on a promenade in Hot Springs. Oni Madden, founder of Harlem's Cotton Club and one of the most powerful organized crime figures of the era, effectively retired to Hot Springs after his New York operation wound down and ran the city's gambling operations for decades. The mayor who presided over this arrangement held office for 22 years. The arrangement ended in 1964 when state authorities finally shut it down. The city's economy, which had been built substantially on illegal gambling, collapsed and spent decades trying to recover. Bill Clinton grew up in Hot Springs. He attended high school there while all of this was still operating. He learned saxophone from local teachers and absorbed the particular culture of a place that had survived by accommodating things other places refused to touch. Whether that background shaped him as a politician is a matter of interpretation. That it shaped him as a person seems hard to dispute. Outside of Hot Springs, the Ouachitas are almost entirely national forest and state park land. The Ouachita National Forest covers 1.8 million acres, one of the largest national forests in the South, and is managed primarily for timber, recreation, and watershed protection. Within its boundaries sits Lake Ouachita, formed when the Ouachita River was dammed in the 1950s. The lake covers nearly 40,000 acres and is consistently ranked among the clearest lakes in the United States. Visibility into the water can extend 15 feet or more in places. The same geology that made the mountains is compressed, relatively impermeable rock. That means less sediment washes into the watershed, producing water clarity that is genuinely unusual for an interior American lake. People come from hundreds of miles to dive and fish in it. The Ouachita National Forest is traversed by the Ouachita National Recreation Trail, a 223-mile footpath from Pinnacle Mountain State Park near Little Rock to Talamina State Park in Oklahoma. And it is considered one of the finest long-distance trails in the American South. Most of it sees almost no one. The Talamina Scenic Drive follows the spine of Rich Mountain along the Arkansas and Oklahoma border, running along ridges so narrow, sometimes only 100 yards wide, that you can see into both states simultaneously from the road. It was designated a National Scenic Byway in 2005. It is one of the most under-visited scenic drives in America, which is itself a strange thing to say about a road that runs through the tallest mountains between the Appalachians and the Rockies. The reason so few people live in the Ouachitas is the same reason the scenery is so intact. The ridges run the wrong direction for agriculture, and long east-west valleys that could be farmed were available, but not enough of them and not accessible enough to support large settlements. The terrain defeated most railroad construction, which meant the timber economy that stripped the Ozarks in the late 1800s reached the Ouachitas later and left sooner. Without railroads, towns did not grow. Without towns, the service economy that sustains population in rural areas never developed. The people who stayed scratched livings from timber, small farms, and the seasonal economy of tourism that has always been present but never dominant enough to anchor a community. The Ouachita National Forest's 1.8 million acres while providing outdoor recreation, also effectively caps the amount of private land available for development. Large swaths of the range are federally owned and managed, which means they generate visitor dollars, but not the kind of permanent economic base that keeps young people from leaving. The pattern is the same as every mountain region in this chapter of the country's story. The federal government protected the land, which preserved its beauty, which made it attractive to visitors but not residents, which means the towns around it grow slowly at best and shrink at worst. The counties inside the range today are Montgomery, Polk, Scott, and their Oklahoma equivalents. They have population figures that tell the same story as the Ozarks, the Boot Heel, and every other rural mountain region in this part of the country. People leave. Young people especially leave. The median age climbs, the schools consolidate, the businesses that serve the people who left do not reopen. What remains is one of the most geologically remarkable, ecologically distinct, and historically loaded regions in the American interior, a mountain range built by a continental collision 300 million years ago that may have once been as tall as the Rockies, that contains water that fell as rain when the pharaohs were building, that produced the institution of spring training baseball and served as the hideout of the American mob, that holds quartz crystal deposits that helped win a world war, and that surrounds some of the clearest lakes and least traveled trails in the South. All of it sitting mostly empty. Most Americans have never heard of it. The ones who have been there tend to go back. The ones who live there tend to stay, even when the economics say they should not. There is something about a mountain range that old, that geologically strange, that historically layered, that gets into people. The Ouachitas are not dramatic in the way the Rockies are dramatic. They are quiet in the way that places shaped by 300 million years of patience tend to be quiet. And quiet places, the country is slowly learning, are worth paying attention to. That is what this channel is here to fix. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Have you been to the Ouachitas, or is this the first time you've heard of them? Because either answer is worth knowing.